Anti-Israel demonstrations getting out of control today, with protesters now taking over buildings on multiple campuses, locking arms, not letting people in, breaking windows. At Princeton University, 13 protesters arrested after briefly seizing an administrative building.
They cannot arrest all of us! They cannot arrest all of us! We will not rest! We will not rest! Until
At Cal Poly Humboldt, police finally cleared out 2 buildings that anti-Israel protesters had taken over since last week, with the university saying what was occurring was not free expression or protest, it was criminal activity, and there were serious concerns it would spread even further on campus. 35 arrested. The protest has already forced the campus to shut down for the rest of the semester. But nothing was quite like the scene at Columbia University very early this morning, where I went to law school, where protesters barricaded, occupied, and destroyed a building used by the dean.
Out the way! Out the way!
And protesters hammering the windows of a door so that they can reach outside and put a bike lock on the doors. And it's just a very, very tense environment. It's a very, very unsafe environment.
And this weekend, one of the over 100 protesters arrested at Washington University of St. Louis was 2024 Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein, who will join us in a moment. She was in Missouri campaigning as part of an effort to get on the ballot in the state. She joined student protests on the campus, which eventually led to a clash with law enforcement. As for how it got to that point, the chancellor of the university said, quote, "When the group began to set up an encampment, which is in clear violation of our explicitly stated policies, we asked them to leave multiple times. They did not leave voluntarily, so we made the decision to peaceably remove them. Unfortunately, they physically resisted." According to the university, 3 officers were injured attempting to make arrests. Dr. Stein posted these videos of her before her arrest, as well as her struggle with police and her subsequent arrest.
Police are gathered here, and we're going to stand here in line with the students who are standing up for democracy.
Hold the line now! Hold the line! Hold the line now! Hold the line! Hold the line! Hold the line! Hold the line! Hold the line now! Y'all gotta go back and
After being released from jail, she had this to say about the charges and her arresting officers.
But then it turned out that I was being charged with assault. They are arresting this encampment that is nothing other than the exercise of our constitutional rights. This is about freedom of speech, and not just any old freedom of speech, but freedom of speech on a very critical issue that needs debate and dialogue. And there they are, sending in the riot police and basically creating a riot.
Joining us now is Dr. Jill Stein, who just left a protest. She's an internal medicine doctor, an activist who is running as a third-party candidate for president. Thank you very much for coming on the program. We really appreciate it. So, look,
Great to be with you.
I completely agree with you. This is a very important issue. Public discussion and debate and dialogue about it is a good, important thing. But at some point, these universities need to allow all the other students to use the facilities, the buildings, the lawns. The First Amendment, as you know, is not absolute. There are time, place, and manner restrictions, and it seems that that's what these crackdowns are about. It's just saying we're going to bring some order back to the school, no?
Well, I guess I would disagree based on what I've seen, based on having attended many of these encampments. Essentially, we see students who are peacefully gathering, mostly doing educational sessions, giving discussions, eating pizza, talking about a really critical issue. As a medical doctor, I'm aware that we are on a death watch right now for 2 million people who've been denied food, water, shelter, sanitation, 800 people using a single toilet who are being actively bombed, and a ground invasion is about to take place. So I completely understand the alarm that everyone is feeling right now, and I have great sympathy with the students' demand that they be allowed to debate and discuss this right now. The violence has been brought on actually by the police. The riot police are causing the riots. There was no reason to be dismantling these camps. The encampments that I have seen, they've been in out-of-the-way places. They're not blocking traffic. They weren't taking over buildings until they were dispersed and basically prohibited from exercising our constitutional rights to free speech and to the right to protest on an absolutely critical issue.
Let me ask you about, you mentioned the police. What did you expect the police to do when you and fellow protesters lock arms, right? They'd been called there to remove you by a private university, and you all are the ones, by locking arms, are you not, forcing physical contact by the police? Instead of, if you weren't locking arms, you could be arrested, you could peaceably be arrested, but by locking arms, you're forcing them to get physical.
Well, what I was trying to do, and I had been invited by the students to please try to negotiate with the police to to negotiate with the administrators of the college and to make them aware that the eyes of the world are watching and that the eyes of the world are very much in sympathy with the students here who are exercising constitutional rights and who are standing up against an absolutely horrific genocide right now, which is rolling forward before our eyes. And as a presidential campaign, we wanted them to be aware that the eyes of the world would be on them and would not look kindly on the university suppressing our basic constitutional rights in order to uphold a genocide. I think it's actually outrageous.
But
it takes me back to my own days at college as well.
I understand you're passionate about this cause. I respect that. I disagree with you on some of it. But it doesn't really answer my question about the need to get physical. The reason the police are being forced to get physical is because protesters like yourself are locking arms and demanding, as a result, that if they're going to arrest you, it's going to have to get physical.
Well, I'll just say I don't think that the university has a right to be calling in riot police when there's an absolutely peaceful exercise of our constitutional rights that's going on. And, you know, I think this is what democracy looks like, to stand up and defend our democratic rights when they are being ripped away from us. And I think the American public is not happy about the suppression of free speech and the suppression of our right to protest. So, yes, you know, when one doesn't obey an unconstitutional order, yes, then there's a certain risk in that. But we're here to have that debate and to call out these issues, to call out the administrations who are basically being bribed by their contracts with the war contractors. They are standing up to defend the war contractors here, and the students are saying not with our tuition dollars, and we as American public are saying not with our taxpayer dollars.
I appreciate the fact that that's your interpretation of the Constitution, and I've said the same thing to these constitutional sheriffs, right, who try to do their own assessment of what the Constitution says. You know, you kind of don't get to decide what the Constitution says unless a court rules for it, right? And if you get a court ruling in your favor...
Let me interject to say that when Columbia went through this before, in 1968, Columbia went through a process of deciding, you know, exactly how they would handle student demonstrations of this nature in the past. And they established a process. Because that process is being violated right now, the faculty has also come out very much in opposition to calling in the police forces right now. And the faculty has also been out there standing in solidarity with the students, saying that we have a process here in the university, and that itself has been violated. And the colleges have made really important contributions to public policy here, you know, initiating the protests against the war in Vietnam, which we finally shut down after 3 million people had been killed in Vietnam, an inordinate amount of taxpayer dollars, and American credibility having been lost in the process. The boycott against South Africa was also advanced by the actions of the students. In fact,
I'm
the
not
whole
challenging.
free speech
Again,
movement,
you're changing the subject a little bit. I appreciate the fact that colleges have been in the past, and they long have been, the place where a lot of these protests have started, and some of them have been righteous, other ones have not. Depends on your point of view. But again, it sounds like what you're saying is because you believe your cause is so righteous that as a result, taking over buildings is okay. It sounds like what you're saying is what the students at Columbia are doing is okay, and you would support it, even though they're breaking windows, taking over buildings, disrupting other students' activities, etc. Am I hearing you correctly? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth.
So, you know, As a rule, I don't support taking over buildings. As a rule, I support the peaceful exercise of our constitutional rights. And that is all that I have witnessed. That's all I've been a part of. And I will say that the effort to disrupt that exercise of our constitutional rights in order to shine daylight on an absolutely critical situation for us as taxpayers, for us as America, which is now partnering with the state of Israel in committing a genocide, which has been condemned by the world, according to the International Court of Justice, according to the United Nations. It is incumbent on all signers to the Anti-Genocide Convention to do everything within our power now to disrupt the commission of genocide.
Well,
and that event is about to roll forward and explode in a very big way right now. So in general, I am very much in support of the students who are standing up right now for what is right and just and supported not only by the majority of people in America, but by the majority of the world's nations.
The polls simply don't support that, right? You know that. The polls do not support
the idea. 68% in a Reuters poll say that the Americans want an immediate ceasefire and
an immediate
diplomatic
ceasefire.
solution.
And you know what else they want? They want the hostages released, right? They want the 68%.
Oh, of course.
Of course,
when were the hostages released? Remember, the biggest hostage release was when there was a ceasefire. That's what you get to.
No, absolutely. But 68% of Americans saying they want a ceasefire doesn't tell us anything. The vast majority of Americans are supportive of American policy that you would be opposed to. And fair enough. You're being very transparent.
Actually, it's over 50% right now that recognize that what Israel is doing is a genocide right now. And those numbers continue to go up. And what is happening now is there's an effort to divert.
That's not true.
There's an effort to divert attention from the commission of this genocide right now to the exercise of free speech on our campuses.
Well, no.
This is really unfortunate,
but
it really reflects very poorly on our universities.
No, it's the protesters who are forcing the change of a subject, right? There is a legitimate debate. And by the way, there has been increasing support for the more pro-Palestinian position throughout time, right? As time has gone on, there's been more support for the pro-Palestinian position. Now, I think what's happening on these campuses, you're actually going to, I believe, do your own cause a disservice because they're going overboard. Police officers are being injured. And you're going to lose support. I mean, for example, the 3 police officers who were supposedly injured at the protest where you were at, do you regret that? Are you sorry about the 3 police officers who were injured?
Absolutely. You know, I'm also sorry about all the protesters who got beat up in the process. So, you know, all this could have been avoided by not calling in the police and allowing the protesters to simply continue to have an encampment
why not tell the
and to have this
not to
issue
lock
debated
arms?
And put on the front burner.
Why not tell the protesters not to lock arms? Because then the police officers won't have to get physical with them. It's easy.
Well,
why not just? And you did it yourself.
The exercise of their free speech is over.
That's not free
the minute
speech.
They
That's
just
action.
surrender
That's
and
action.
roll over to the police.
That's not free
speech.
speech.
I think the fault here lies with the university for shutting down free speech and for debate about an absolutely critical subject, which is destroying American credibility, which is really on its last legs right now. You know, we as taxpayers have paid $12,000 this year for the continued cost of our endless war machine. And we are in a war right now, remember, which is exploding and which is rapidly expanding. And Israel is attempting to drag the United States into a war with Iran.
I'm trying to give you as much of an opportunity to speak because I totally respect that. I appreciate you coming on the program, and I want to give you as much of an opportunity as possible. But I would like to try, because we can debate the Israel topic another day, and I'd be happy to have you on for a long period of time to have a bigger debate and discussion about the Middle East. But right now, and I know they're connected, I'm trying to focus on what's happening on the campuses, right? Because the Washington University chancellor, where you were arrested, said, quote, "This was not a peaceful protest by our students. This was something else. The majority of this group was not WashU students, faculty, or staff. Some of the protesters were behaving aggressively. There were chants that many in our community find threatening and anti-Semitic." Can you disagree with that?
Let me speak to that. Yes,
please.
It is a very rude awakening. It is a very rude awakening as a Jew to have to look at Zionism and the actual nature of Zionism and its essential function in Israel to basically have displaced Palestinians and practice ethnic cleansing.
Is there any way you can actually respond to his comment?
I think it is a mistake to consider anti-Zionism the same thing as anti-Semitism. They're 2 very different things. Remember, I don't know if you were around at the birth of the civil rights movement. You know, but this was my, my years of growing up in the 1960s. It was a very rude awakening to the white community to deal with white supremacy. In fact, you couldn't even use the term for decades, and to actually grapple with discrimination and segregation in all of our institutions was very disconcerting, and people tried to suppress that conversation and to criminalize it, in fact. And much was thought to, some of what was thought to be anti-Semitism, and in fact, the encampment at Northeastern University in Boston was shut down because of anti-Semitic slurs. Well, it turned out on later videos that those anti-Semitic slurs were being inserted by the pro-Israeli counter-protesters who were there.
I could sit here, and cite the example.
There's ugly speech on both sides. There's ugly speech on both sides. But I think we need to acknowledge that dialogue here is really critical and really important.
Dialogue is not,
and the university should not be shutting it down.
Dialogue is not encamping and locking arms and forcing police to get physical and forcing police in a situation that they don't want to get physical with you. That's not dialogue.
There was no need.
That's not dialogue.
At the encampment I was at, there was absolutely no need to bring in
but that's not your choice to make.
Police.
You don't get to make that decision.
Well, I'm a citizen, and I do believe that our constitutional rights are very important, especially in wartime, because that is what gets shut down. And we are in a war right now and a genocide. And I think it calls for substantial ethical actions. We are in a moment of genocide, and this is the moral imperative of the moment.
Quick political question for you. I know you've been asked this 1,000 times. After 2016, the left blamed you for giving the election to Donald Trump, et cetera. When it comes to 2024, you're polling around 2%, maybe 3%, and a real player that could impact the election. Do you have any preference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden if you don't win, such that if your candidacy were to hurt Biden more, that would bother you or not?
So let me just say the latest poll, which was out of Wisconsin, showed us at 8% overall and 22% among people 30 and under. So remember, Bernie Sanders himself was percolating along at 2 to 3% until he actually broke the sound barrier later in the primary. So I wouldn't,
I wasn't mocking it in any way. Just so you know, my point was it's actually quite substantial. Was the point I was making?
Well, and I think it's more substantial than even the figures that you quoted would cite. And I'd say we're going to have 3 pro-war, pro-genocide candidates on the ballot between RFK, Trump, and Kennedy, and there will be a 4th, which is our campaign, which will be the only pro-worker, anti-war, anti-genocide campaign at a time when the American people are clamoring for other choices than these 2 zombies that are being forced down their throats.
So they're equal to you. They're equal zombies.
In fact, look at the turnout.
Zombie A and Zombie B, the same.
And look at the turnout of the Democratic primary in New York. 83% of voters voted no by not coming out relative to the last primary. So the American people are clamoring, and we know that votes for third parties come from non-voters. They don't come from Democrats. And to say that these votes belong to Democrats, Democrats have to earn their vote.
I certainly didn't say that.
They don't own the vote.
I didn't say that.
Well, a lot of people do. A lot of people do who want to blame third parties. We're an opportunity. We are not a threat.
Jill Stein, important discussion. I really appreciate you coming on the program. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.